This is week 4 of Pathwork Lecture 187, which is how to handle the alternation of expansive and contractive states. And this section, I corralled the information on how relationships reflect and accelerate individual growth. Now, why would that be a subtopic within expansive and contractive states? And my answer would be because it's in relationships that we may experience the most emotional expansion and contraction. We may be, for instance, contracted the majority of our time when we are working and not notice much of a variation. But in our personal lives with our friends, we'll notice different interactions with friends, with intimate partners. We might notice far more expansion than with others or contraction. So we can feel these things because they're more emotionally laden in relationships than they are in tasks and chores. Now, you can also feel them in tasks and chores. It depends on your character, your personality, your knowledge of yourself. So some people do a lot of spiritual work based on work and chores. It's a safe place for them to work, and they can very easily see and work with that, whereas relationships may feel more vulnerable and risky. It doesn't matter where you handle or learn to handle the expansion and contraction. You'll need to learn to handle it as you become more mature. So, why relationships? I'm going to focus on that. You can take these same words and apply them to tasks or chores or professions. People, other people, institutions, jobs. Once again, I'm going to try to limit this to one type of thing. So I'm going to keep saying people. Please expand it for me. People aren't under your command and control. In relationship, we come across the hard reality that the other person, even if they've agreed with us for decades, eventually there will be a moment where they do not agree with us, and there may be nothing we can do about it, where we have to realize the independence of the other person, the autonomy of the other person, and the authority of the other person that conflicts with our own desires, autonomy, and authority. This is what relationship brings. For instance, in the pathwork that I did, you can learn a lot about pathwork in classes, and we didn't have Zoom then, but in classes and private sessions and so forth. But there are some lessons that can't be learned until you're in close contact with people over a significant period of time. There are some things that simply don't come to the surface until you've been around people long enough to become annoyed at them. And it's when you become annoyed at them that there's something that can be worked on. So as long as everybody's happy and there's no problem, it's hard to work on things. An example of this would be that there's a thing in pathwork called the higher self mask. And that means that the person is saying, everything's fine, I'm fine, I love God, I'm a good person, I'm happy with my self-development. That may be true. It is also a good way to avoid doing any work. It's a good way to avoid bringing up things that aren't fine. So it's a mask, it's a cover-up that may be necessary for one state of development. We're not ready to work, or we're not ready to work in this group. And so you can have the mask. The mask in itself is not the problem. Believing in the mask as the actual reality is the problem. So the fact that I say I'm fine because I don't want to have a discussion with someone is just a polite way of saying not here, not now, not with you. But I need to know that things aren't fine if they aren't, or that whatever's not fine is not something I'm ready to work on at the moment. Those are legitimate issues of self-autonomy, self-authority. I own them. I'm responsible for them. The idea is for me to know they're there and to know when I just don't want to interact with someone else. So again, relationships, they reflect and accelerate our growth because they reveal things, they bring things up. Even knowing that I don't want to talk to someone is information that I may not have realized until they invite me to have a discussion and I realize I don't want to. Then I can ask why not, or what's going on for me, without necessarily caving in or doing what the other person wants me to do. So relationships with other people are not 100% under your control. And you can fantasize that they are, but at some point reality will intervene. Reality will surface. The dilemma with this is that very often we create relationships by manipulation and demand that the other person accedes to, they submit to what we want. Now, this is most obvious in employment situations where the boss says, "Are you happy?" And the employee says, "Yes, I am." And they want to convince the boss because there's a power struggle here. I have to be happy at my job and make the boss happy for me to take the money home and have my life. It's an unequal arrangement, and the person may have decided that they will be subservient to this more powerful individual. If we think that that's truth, I get along fine at work, everybody does what I tell them to do, then we go home and our friends or our spouse or our children do not do what we tell them to do. And we become annoyed and angry. And why can't you just be like everybody else? And what I'm trying to point out here is that that is in part due to having an unequal power structure in one aspect of our lives that hides reality from us. We don't get the feedback that we need. Whereas in another relationship, we get plenty of feedback and we don't like it. So we can create these unrealistic situations that could last for decades. Especially if someone admires or respects you. It's a problem with any facilitator in any format where you invite someone to engage and you're teaching them and they're very happy and they're learning. And we've just finished discussing this in the group here tonight. They're very happy with what you've been giving them and they grow and grow. And at some point they become very annoyed because you're no longer as good as you used to be. The reality is they're the same person they used to be, and you have grown and your needs have grown, which is the point of learning anything. And this other person may or may not be able to adjust to meet the new set of needs that you have, but they're not under your control or command. They're not responsible to you for who they are or what they want. So I found an article that I worked on this afternoon that listed 4 things that are not your responsibility or under your control. And I love things that say, little popular articles that say 4 things. I can retain 4 things for a while and I can focus on that. Helps me structure how I think. So here are the 4 things that were in this article. What you're not responsible for, what is not under your control, is other people's happiness, sadness, or any other form of emotion. It's not yours. You can't control it. They can gift you with coming to your mood, being happy when you're happy and sad when you're sad. Without your realizing it, they're in charge. They are gifting that to you. And one day they get tired of gifting you and they stop. Another thing is you're not responsible for and you cannot control their decisions. Now, again, you may be under the illusion that you can do this because the other person has allowed you to have that illusion, or they feel safe or taken care of because you are going to make all the decisions for them. But most people get to the point in their lives where they want more. They want to be more responsible for their decisions, and they want to make decisions that are more in line with where they are now than when they made the original association. So even in a job, we hire into a place and we take a certain job and then we want to advance and there's no place for us. And we become irritable and tired and we want the company to grow and enlarge and go down new avenues. But that may not be what they want and need. So we may have to look elsewhere for our desires to be filled. It's not a failure on either part. It does become a failure when the blame starts, the blame game starts. So you're not filling my needs is a blame game. They're not good enough. They used to be good enough, but they're not is a more insidious, softer blame. And sometimes what I do is I try to make, I use bluntness and hyperbole to exaggerate things, because otherwise this subtle blaming just lays down there and we don't see it as blaming. We see it as reasonable and conciliatory when it's hiding a demand. And so it's important to get that demand on the surface so we can see it. The third thing is it is not their responsibility. It is not under their control, the outcome of your efforts. The fact that you made a big effort to do something and it didn't work out is not somebody else's responsibility to make your efforts fruitful in the real world. It is very often beyond their control. Even if they are agreeing, you'll find some evidence. There'll be cracks someplace in the illusion where you realize that some people think you're still great and other people are not as happy with you as they used to be. It's unpleasant to get to those moments in time, but it's honest feedback. And I think that's the essence of relationships is it's difficult for people to give you honest feedback. It really is. They would like to avoid confrontation. They would like to avoid your displeasure. They would like to avoid having to defend their own point of view. They would like everything to be smooth and pretty and nice. And so they will avoid challenging you. And if you, in that kind of relationship, there's a place where you need to take responsibility for having gone into that relationship, looking for that. So here's how I describe it. Got a little light on your head, a little radar center saying, please, I need a relationship where I'm thought of as wonderful. Anybody else need somebody in a relationship where they think I'm the most wonderful thing they've ever seen? And the little message light is flashing. And you attract a person who wants you to be wonderful, and they will support you and they will say all the right things until the day when they decide to grow up and be their own wonderfulness. And they're not as satisfied with you being the superstar. They want their own development to proceed. So it comes out in difficult human relations. But let me get to the fourth one. So the outcome of your efforts is not their responsibility, and other people's expectations are not your responsibility. Again, you may have contributed to those expectations. Now, this is something that I, in my personal life, am very vulnerable to, is I tend to allow people's expectations to be fulfilled. And then they want more, and I give them more, and they want more, and I give them more. And then at some point, I reach my limit. I no longer want to strive to meet their expectations. And they naturally are disappointed and think all they have to do is encourage me, and I'll continue to fulfill their expectations. But I can't. They're not mine. They're yours. And so this is something that has to be negotiated. Again, something that came up in the meeting before this little video. It is hard to negotiate everything constantly all the time. It's exhausting. And we'd like things to stay the same. But organic life is growing every minute, every day, every hour, every year. We're growing constantly. We just can't be the same person that we used to be. So if the other person says, you're convenient, I know where you are, I can do my stuff, and I know where we fit together, The example I come up with is two people decide to harness themselves together. It can be workmates, it can be a company and its staff, it can be two people who are partners, spouses, it can be friends, it can even be parents and children. They harness themselves together and it works wonderfully. And it can be incredibly efficient, effective, and pleasurable to go on like that. But we're not horses. And we change. And at one point, that harness chafes. And we want to go faster or slower or in a different direction. And that's not the other person's desire. And that happens very slowly. And so we talk ourselves out of it, or they compensate. And so the gulf gets wider without our realizing it until we snap. And that's what I was trying to explain about my personal life is I tend to get caught in a situation where I suddenly don't like someone. And it is very painful for me to realize that I'm responsible for that, that my lack of communication, my lack of willingness to expose my needs and work on these small negotiating details has created a gulf. And then I see where the gulf is so big, I don't know how to fill it or bridge it. And the easiest answer is to terminate the friendship, the job, the relationship. And that's cowardly. I'm using the word cowardly because I use it against myself, trying to bring myself into realization that I could have spoken up earlier. It was my responsibility. I did not take it. And therefore, I bear some responsibility for the termination and the other person's reaction to that. They may not have been aware and they aren't ready to accept it. And so if you don't fix the small stuff, you have to fix the big stuff. But I'm going to loop back around to how relationships reflect and accelerate individual growth. Even those terminations and realizations are growth. So you can't lose in this. You can forestall. But the longer you forestall, it's like that gap getting bigger and bigger. The bill's going to come due one day. So week 4 of Patrick Lecture 187. We'll move on to another lecture next month. But if this one intrigues you, please stay with it for as long as it serves you. And thanks for listening.